Fair use. Copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976. Allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, education, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing.
Before we start the video, make sure to subscribe to my channel. I appreciate all the support I received from you. And as always, all the information in my videos is rumors taken from the internet or the street. I'm not saying the information is fact.
Pick your mans up.
And just because people used to come through shooting us every day. And this block, words can't even explain. Can't even explain.
Yeah, man.
Little school brother, go far away on money.
Young Money, man. They in the building.
600 boy, LA, man. LA Capone, man. Get it to him, man. OC2 boys, man. Team
Number 9, man. Number 9 shooter, you hear me?
Hey, bitch, this little bitch. Yeah. What the fuck is wrong with you? Hey, I am Brick Squad. Yeah, Brick Squad, boy. What the fuck is you talking about, bro?
You have to be willing to die or go to jail for 100 years if that's the lane that you're stepping in. You have to understand that whether you 15, 16, you got to think like a man. You know what I'm saying?
So don't be in it. Oh, you're not? Why does everybody say you're only 16 years old?
They say what they want to say.
How old
How old are you?
300.
The story of Goonie Boss Gang.
We always out there. Gang in the back.
This is the story of the Goonie Boss Gang, a highly requested set that many of you have been asking me to cover in a video. In this video, I'll dive into their history, key members, the wars they've been involved in, and the widely discussed RICO case brought against them by the FBI. This story primarily focuses on the years 2014 to 2018, when a small group in Chicago known as the Goonie Boss Gang unleashed chaos and fear across Inglewood. But to truly understand how it all unfolded, we need to go further back in time. Goonie Boss Gang is a gangster disciple set located on 70th and Elizabeth in West Inglewood, right next to Tuncheville, DVDMG, T-Love, Mayblock, and CMB Crazyville. Goonie Boss Gang was founded in 2008 by three brothers, Lil A, G Winnie, and G Boy, two of whom would later become key witnesses in the FBI's RICO case against the very organization they helped build. The three brothers formed the gang in the aftermath of their fourth brother's death, Lil Al, in April 2008. In its earliest form, the group was never meant to be a gang in the traditional sense. It was envisioned as a close-knit circle where each member was their own boss, free from the influence of the neighborhood's dominant gang hierarchies. The Goonies organized basketball games and other activities at Ogden Park, reflecting the spirit of the Albert Vaughn Jr. Foundation, established by their father to carry on Albert's legacy through youth tournaments. According to the brothers, it was never intended to evolve into what it ultimately became. But that narrative was met with heavy skepticism in court. During cross-examination, prosecutors challenged the claim that Goonie Boss began as a harmless social group, posing pointed questions like, so Goonie Boss is just a bunch of guys who like to play basketball and swim in Ogden Park? The four brothers, with the last name Vaughn, shared a deep bond, and after the loss of one in 2008, the remaining three grew even closer, standing by each other no matter the cost. The oldest brother was Robert, known as G Winnie, born in 1988. Then came the twins, Albert, called Lil Al, and Alvin, known as G Boy, born in 1990. The youngest was Alex, or Lil A, born in 1994. That loyalty was evident in an incident from 2014 or 2015. When Lil A got into a physical altercation, his brother G-Boy responded with deadly force, shooting the man Lil A had fought with in the head. The victim, known as Boo Boo, was reportedly a friend of G-Boy. In a twist that underscored the complexity of their relationships, both G-Boy and Lil A rushed him to the hospital, an act that likely saved his life. The Vaughn family was large and deeply rooted in Chicago, with long-standing ties to major street gangs. One of their uncles was even a general in the Gangster Disciples. The family included 11 members, their mother, father, 4 brothers, and 5 sisters. However, there were siblings from other families as well. G-Boy testified that had 23 siblings and that he had 9 kids himself. They originally lived on Chicago's low end at 41st and Federal in the now demolished Robert Taylor homes. After those buildings were torn down in 2007, the family relocated to 59th and Morgan, also known as No Love City. 1 or 2 years later, when their dad got locked up, the family moved again, this time to 71st and Elizabeth, an area where the 3 Vaughn brothers would later go on to form the Goonie Boss Gang after the 4th brother's passing. the Vaughn family first moved into their new neighborhood, things weren't easy. A man known as Old Man took an immediate dislike to them, simply because they were from the low end, an area with people his gang had beef with. At the time, Old Man was the dominant figure in the area and led a local gang called ETG, short for Elizabeth True Gangsters, the set that controlled the territory before the rise of Goonie Boss Gang. Old Man had even killed someone from the low end himself. However, surprisingly, the conflict between him and the Vaughn family was resolved fairly quickly. Over time, the Vaughn brothers began spending time with Old Man and members of ETG, often running errands and doing what they were told. Still, according to the brothers, they were never officially part of ETG. And as mentioned earlier, after their brother Lil Al was beaten to death with a baseball bat, the three remaining brothers, G-Boy, Lil A, and G-Winnie, formed the Goonie Boss Gang together with 4 others: E-Boogie, Del, Ray Ray, and Boosie. The name came from Lil Al, who often shouted Goonie, and since they all looked up to him, they chose the name Goonie Boss Gang in his honor. The gang operated within the area stretching from 67th to 71st Street, and from Morgan to Ashland Avenue.
The Goonie Boss Gang operated with a structure similar to many other Chicago gangs. Members held regular meetings and pooled their money to fund purchases of guns and drugs for the group. At first, Goonie Gang got most of their guns through Old Man from ETG. Later, they began purchasing weapons from older guys affiliated with E-Town. When O-Dog joined, he started bringing in guns from outside the city as he originated from Streeton. Goonie Boss and Goonie Gang represent 2 different eras of the same group. Goonie Boss was the original name, created in memory of their brother during a time when the focus was more on unity and identity. As the group evolved and became involved in violent conflicts and street wars, they came to be known as Goonie Gang. By then, the 2 names had essentially merged, marking the transition from the early days to a darker, more dangerous chapter known as the Goonie Boss Gang.
Around the years 2009 to 2010, Goonie Gang members started protecting themselves with guns. Over the years, they relied on various gun suppliers. Initially it was Old Man, followed by Big John, and later a man named Brent Turpin, who provided Tuka with a firearm that eventually found its way into the hands of Goonie Gang. comes to allies and enemies, Goonie Boss Gang's most volatile rivalries were with D-Town, SMG Push Squad, and 071 Ada Block, J-Town, and 3rd Gang. But Goonie Boss was in a different place between 2010 and 2013. While other gangs in Chicago were deep in deadly beefs during the height of the drill era, Goonie Boss mostly stayed out of it. At that time, they were focused on making money and didn't have any serious enemies yet. Things began to change when people like O-Dog joined and started causing conflicts, which pushed the gang in a completely different direction, filled with violence, drugs, and murder. In the beginning, the focus was mostly on drugs and making money, but over time they started encroaching on other gangs' territory by selling in the wrong areas. This sparked violence and eventually led to a series of murders, with O-Dog the leader playing the biggest role. The relationship between Goonie Boss Gang and both ETG and E-Town was mostly solid. As mentioned earlier, they bought guns and drugs from Old Man, the main figure in the area. However, there were times when things got tense between Goonie Boss and E-Town, usually because of who Goonie Boss members were associating with, but it never escalated into anything too serious. Goonie Gang eventually built up friendships with other gangs as well, such as YMM, CMB, and Brick Squad. A significant part of this story centers around 18-year-old Albert Vaughn, who was killed in early April 2008. Albert, known by those close to him as Lil Al or King Albert, was one of the early members of Goonie Boss Gang. He was also part of a set called Dead End NTG, short for Normal Town Gangsters, a set that would eventually become known as Brick Squad, the same faction later associated with Lil Jojo. On the night of August 5th, 2008, sometime between 10 and 10:30 p.m., 18-year-old Albert Lil Al Vaughn got into an argument with a man named Baron at a house party on the 7000 block of South Throop Street in Chicago. The confrontation quickly escalated into a physical fight outside, where Lil Al knocked Baron unconscious. After the altercation, Albert left the party with his younger brother Alvin, also known as G-Boy, and a friend named Fabian, heading back home. Once home, Albert and G-Boy realized their youngest brother had been left behind at the party. As they prepared to return for him, they heard loud banging at the door. Baron's friends had shown up. Before anything more could happen, the noise ceased as police arrived in the area. With the immediate threat gone, Albert, G-Boy, and Fabian made their way back toward Throop Street. Fearing more violence, the three armed themselves with makeshift weapons, boards ripped from a porch, nails still jutting out. At the same time, Chicago police officers Robert Cummings and Keon Feisel were responding to a dispatch reporting a battery in progress. They were the first officers to arrive at the chaotic scene at 70th and Throop. Officer Cummings later described it plainly. It was total chaos, people fighting everywhere. I'm guessing 50 people minimum out fighting in the streets. Officer Cummings quickly radioed for backup and requested an ambulance to transport Baron to the hospital. Within a minute, additional officers began arriving at the scene, including officers Michael Collins and Miguel Renteria. As reinforcements moved in, Officer Cummings focused on breaking up the fights and dispersing the increasingly volatile crowd. According to his account, it took roughly 5 to 6 minutes to bring the chaos under control. As Albert, G-Boy, and Fabian approached the scene, tensions were still high. Police officers were in the middle of dispersing a large, chaotic crowd. According to G-Boy's later testimony, around 5 officers drew their firearms and ordered the trio to drop the wooden boards they were carrying. Officer Robert Cummings confirmed he was among those who pointed a weapon at the boys, instructing them to drop their makeshift weapons and warning that they would be arrested if they didn't leave immediately. While Albert and his companions complied and dropped the boards, they refused to walk away from the scene. Rather than leaving, Albert and his companions began exchanging words with Baron's friends, who were split into 2 groups, one across the street, the other off to the side. The argument quickly escalated into a heated shouting match, lasting 10 to 15 minutes. Barron's associates hurled threats as roughly 10 Chicago police officers stood nearby, watching the situation unfold. Then, without warning, a young man named Nathaniel Tucker emerged from a nearby house. According to G-Boy, Tucker struck Albert twice in the head with a metal baseball bat. Focused on the confrontation with Barron's group, G-Boy didn't see Tucker until it was too late. Tragically, Albert, known to many as Lil Al, succumbed to the severe head injuries he sustained in the attack. At the moment of the attack, the nearest police officer, whose identity G-Boy couldn't determine, was standing roughly 10 to 15 feet away in the middle of Throop Street. As chaos erupted, G-Boy watched Nathaniel Tucker flee the scene, with several officers in pursuit. Within minutes, Tucker was apprehended. He would later plead guilty to first-degree murder. Conflicting accounts from Chicago police officers paint a chaotic and tragic picture of the moments leading up to Albert Vaughn's death. While all officers agree the scene was tense and crowded, their descriptions of how the attack unfolded vary in detail. Officer Robert Cummings testified that after ordering Albert to drop a wooden board and leave, Albert insisted on finding his younger brother before walking south on Throop Street. Moments later, Cummings says he witnessed Nathaniel Tucker leap out from behind an ambulance and strike Albert twice in the head with a metal baseball bat. The attack, he claimed, lasted no more than 6 seconds. Cummings helped pursue and arrest Tucker shortly after. Other officers recalled the scene differently. Officer Keon Feisel reported seeing Albert walking north with a stick, refusing initial commands to leave. He claimed Tucker suddenly appeared from across the street with a hidden bat and attacked. Officer David McGrew also saw Albert walking north, agitated but unarmed, before spotting a very fast movement, Tucker striking Albert twice. Officer Robert Mangan described Albert walking away after a brief argument, then gesturing toward Tucker, who ran across the street and delivered 2 fatal blows. Officer Michael Collins testified that Albert and Tucker had been loudly arguing moments before Tucker emerged from the crowd and attacked. Finally, Officer Miguel Renteria stated he saw Albert acting aggressively in the street while holding a stick. He ordered him to return to the sidewalk. At that moment, he saw Tucker approaching from the opposite side of the street with a bat and landing a single blow. Despite their differing perspectives, all officers agree. The fatal attack happened in a matter of seconds, fast, violent, and in full view of law enforcement. In the aftermath, the man responsible, Nathaniel Tucker, was ultimately sentenced to 25 years in prison for the killing. At Albert Vaughn's funeral, heartbroken relatives and neighbors pleaded for an end to the senseless violence. But the grief was soon followed by more gunfire. Shots rang out at a makeshift memorial on the very day a suspect was charged with Vaughn's murder. As public attention faded, his father, Albert Sr., took action. He launched a non-profit in his son's name, dedicated to guiding at-risk youth away from street life. Yet, according to federal prosecutors in the 2018 RICO case against the Goonie boss gang, Vaughn's death marked the beginning of a movement that, while born from good intentions, spiraled into even greater violence in the heart of Inglewood. In 2018, a sweeping joint investigation by federal and state authorities led to racketeering and murder charges against 5 members of Goonie boss gang. Prosecutors claimed the group and its associates had unleashed a wave of terror across Inglewood, a neighborhood on the city's south side, linking them to 11 murders and 6 attempted killings over an 18-month period between 2014 and 2016. Each defendant faced charges of committing murder as part of a racketeering conspiracy, a charge that carries a mandatory life sentence if convicted. The individuals named in the indictment included Romeo Blackman, better known as O-Dog, whose name will come up frequently in this story, along with Terrence Smith, known as T, Jolicious Turman, also known as Jojo, Nathaniel McElroy, referred to as Nate or Nation, and Christian Sivon, who went by the nickname Lil D, or Steph Curry. This RICO case forms the backbone of this story. Throughout this documentary, I'll break down each conflict, each killing, and show how it all ultimately unraveled and collapsed. The history of the Goonie Boss Gang was presented to a federal jury through the testimony of Albert's younger brother, Lil A. His account outlined the group's formation and activities in detail. Albert's second brother, Alvin, or G-Boy, also played a crucial role, testifying against the defendants in exchange for immunity granted by the U.S. Attorney's Office. The truth is, both Lil A and G-Boy were among the original founders of the Goonie Boss Gang, formed in the wake of their brother's death in April 2008. Testifying under an immunity agreement that protected him from prosecution, Lil A. Vaughn told the jury that he helped form the Goonie Boss Gang in the aftermath of his brother's murder. His original vision, he said, was to create something different, a tight-knit group where each member was their own boss, free from the control of the neighborhood's entrenched gang structures. Early on, the Goonies gathered for organized basketball games and sports activities at Ogden Park, echoing the mission of the Albert Vaughn Jr. Foundation, an initiative launched by their father to honor Albert's legacy through youth basketball tournaments. But the streets had its own gravity. What began as a brotherhood quickly shifted. By 2011, Lil A admitted Goonie Boss had transformed into a violent gang. The turning point came when Romeo Blackman, known on the streets as O-Dog, rose to prominence through a string of deadly shootings that earned him fear, respect, and leadership. That's when Goonie changed, Lil A testified, wearing a Chicago Bulls hoodie as he spoke before U.S. District Judge John Robert Blakey. As mentioned earlier, a significant portion of this story centers on O-Dog, the leader of Goonie Boss, who rose to infamy as a shooter and killer after the federal indictment was made public. Prior to that, both O-Dog and the Goonie Boss Gang remained relatively unknown, even among those closely following the Chicago street scene. Today, many still know little about their origins or the violence that followed. The nickname O-Dog is most likely a reference to the 1993 film Menace to Society, where the character O-Dog serves as the violent, unpredictable enforcer of the crew, infamous for his ruthlessness and brutality as one of the most feared young delinquents on screen. To be blunt, the nickname proved fitting for Romeo Blackman, who swiftly ascended to the role of leader within Goonie Boss. By the time the FBI apprehended him, Blackman was linked to 7 murders during his time on the streets. O-Dog wasn't exactly unknown to the police. In fact, he had already made a name for himself with law enforcement after beating a first-degree murder charge in August 2014, followed by another in December 2015. Beyond the murder charges, O-Dog had been arrested multiple times over the years, with offenses including unlawful use of a weapon. O-Dog's troubled path began at birth. According to hospital records, he was born at the University of Chicago Medical Center in 1995, with both cocaine and alcohol in his system. His defense team later referenced this during trial proceedings, pointing to scientific studies linking prenatal cocaine exposure to long-term behavioral issues, including impaired self-regulation. O-Dog was someone everyone listened to and looked up to. Lil A from Goonie Gang even testified that O-Dog put in so much work that everybody became scared of him. Many people, even those who were friends with him or part of the same gang, also started to fear him because he had killed members of his own crew from E-Town and Goonie Gang. Now we will go into the first murders that occurred during this period, which of course were carried out by none other than O-Dog himself. We will start with the year 2014. In 2014, O-Dog was responsible for 4 murders. 2 of them were members of his own crew, E-Town Goonie Gang. The third was from a rival group known as Chunky City, and the 4th was innocent. The first 2 victims, Big John and King Zoe, both affiliated with E-Town Goonie Gang, were killed on January 22nd and March 21st, 2014, respectively. The reason O-Dog killed 2 of his own was because he overheard Big John and King Zoe, along with Elon and PB, plotting against him and some other members of Goonie Gang. He was standing in the hallway of a building on Racine when he caught their conversation through a closed door. When Big John unexpectedly opened the door, O-Dog immediately shot and killed him. Big John, who lived in the building, was pronounced dead at the scene at the age of 21. It also appears there was another reason behind the killing. Lil A from Goonie Gang believed Big John was snitching. Earlier that day, Lil A had purchased a 9mm gun from Big John, and not long after, police arrived with a search warrant specifically targeting that weapon. Although they didn't find the gun, Lil A was arrested for having ammunition. Just 15 hours later, Big John was dead. A week or 2 after the killing, O-Dog bragged to Lil A and other Goonie Gang members that he was the one responsible. Lil A felt remorseful after learning that O-Dog was behind the killing, saying he didn't believe Big John deserved it. The 2 had been close. Big John was the first person Lil A met after moving to Elizabeth, and they spent a lot of time together. Lil A also said he started feeling paranoid around O-Dog, figuring that if O-Dog could do that to Big John, he could just as easily turn on anyone else in the crew. As mentioned earlier, 3 months later, O-Dog killed another E-Town member, Zoe, also known as King Inglewood. Zoe also claimed affiliations with Blockburner and Brick Squad, but he was not part of the Goonie Boss Gang, a fact that was confirmed during the trial. The ones who killed Zoe were O-Dog and T from the Goonie Boss Gang, 2 of the main figures in the RICO case. O-Dog later bragged about the murder to other Goonie Boss Gang members, including Lil A, claiming that he and T were responsible. They had been following Zoe for days, waiting for the right moment. One day, while hanging out in a gangway on Elizabeth Street, they saw him. O-Dog bragged about how he popped out the cut and started shooting. Zoe returned fire, and that's when T began shooting as well. Zoe was struck 3 times in the right leg and once in the upper chest. He was rushed to Advocate Christ Medical Center in Oak Lawn, where he was pronounced dead 3 hours later. The reason they killed him was likely the same as with Big John, tied to the conversation O-Dog had overheard involving both of them. Just a few months later, in August 2014, a third member of Goonie Gang E-Town lost his life, this time at the hands of his own friends, but by accident. Lil Mo from Blockburn, a Goonie Gang, was behind the wheel of a red Chevrolet Monte Carlo with Reese and Wally, both also from Goonie Gang, when they were involved in a police chase. While trying to escape, Lil Mo lost control and crashed into a light pole near West 80th Street and South Low Avenue. The car flipped onto its side, killing 16-year-old Wally, who was in the back seat and died from a broken neck. Police believe the group had been involved in a shooting just before the crash. Lil Mo, who tested positive for marijuana, was charged with reckless homicide, aggravated DUI, and unlawful possession of a handgun, in addition to several traffic violations and driving without a license. Reese, a convicted felon, was charged with felony unlawful possession of a firearm. On October 23, 2014, O-Dog carried out another murder, which Lil A from Goonie Gang later testified about during the trial against his former crew. What makes this murder particularly notable is that Lil A gave a highly detailed account of how it happened, offering a rare insight into how many hits like this actually unfold. It all began when about a dozen members of the Goonie Boss gang were hanging out on 70th and Aberdeen. Among them were Lil A, O-Dog, Tuka, and several others, including Lil A's girlfriend at the time, Raven. Out of nowhere, O-Dog and Tuka decided they wanted to do a drill, but first, they needed a car, so they left to go steal one. After a while, they returned with a stolen minivan with Tuka behind the wheel. O-Dog, Jazzy, and Marco from CMB, who was King Von's cousin, pulled up in a separate car. Once they arrived, everyone got serious, loading up their weapons and changing clothes to get ready to slide on their ops. There were actually several cars out that day, almost like a caravan. Marco's car, the minivan that Tuka had just stolen, Lil A's girlfriend's car, and one or two others. At first, Lil A got into the minivan after O-Dog ordered him to. T from Goonie Gang and Lala from ETG were also in the van and were the ones armed, ready to carry out a shooting. Originally, Lil A and T were supposed to be the shooters, but Lala was eager to do it, so Lil A handed his gun over to him. After that, Lil A stepped out of the van to talk to his girlfriend, Raven, asking her to follow behind in her car and watch for police. If she saw anything suspicious, she was supposed to warn them so they could call off the hit. Even though Lil A had given up his gun and hoped that meant he wouldn't have to be involved anymore, O-Dog made it clear he wasn't off the hook, telling him, "You're still riding with us. You're not getting out of this one." During his testimony, Lil A described the route they took in detail. We were on Aberdeen and turned right. Then we went up to Carpenter, made another right, and headed straight towards 71st. At 71st and Racine, we made a left, then went to 72nd and turned right again. We kept going toward the street where O-Dog lived. After passing Loomis and heading toward Bishop, that's when we spotted a gentleman. Lil A testified that they saw a man unloading bags from a van in Ada Block territory. Another, heavier person got out of a nearby car and walked toward the man with the bags, who was thinner and had dreadlocks. That's when O-Dog said, "That's one of them." He stopped the van, and Lala slid the side door open and started shooting. When he finished and tried to close the door, T opened fire as well, but accidentally hit Lala in the hand, causing him to scream. O-Dog told him to lift his arm and rest it on his lap to keep blood from getting all over the van. As they looked ahead, they noticed a swarm of police nearby. O-Dog quickly told everyone to pass their guns up front. They kept driving straight toward the squad cars, and although officers had their weapons drawn, they didn't know which vehicle to go after since they hadn't seen where the shots came from. O-Dog made 2 calm left turns, trying not to raise suspicion, but moments later they heard someone yell, "It's the van! It's the van!" The police began chasing them, and O-Dog hit the gas. As they sped through the streets, a squad car nearly collided with them, but O-Dog swerved just in time to avoid a crash. After that, they crashed the van into several other parked cars, and everyone jumped out, scrambling over fences and cutting through backyards. Somehow, after what felt like a scene straight out of a movie, they all made it back to Elizabeth Street without getting caught. When they got back to Elizabeth, they met up with O-Dog, G-Boy, Old Man, Lala's brother Boom, and some other people. Old Man and Boom asked Lil A what happened, who said, "We were sliding on the ops, and Lala had shot someone, but we don't know if they died. And in the process of him shooting someone, T shot him, and we went on a high-speed chase with the police." Old Man and Boom were upset, not just because Lala had been arrested after going to get medical help, but also because Lala was Old Man's nephew and Boom's brother. They said that if T hadn't shot Lala, they would have gotten away clean. When they got back to Elizabeth, they also realized that the shooting had turned into a murder. The man they shot, known as Nuki, had died about an hour later at Advocate Christ Medical Center in Oak Lawn. Nuki was affiliated with Cocky World Video Gang, also known as Yale Boys. Lala, who was arrested after getting treated at the same hospital as the victim, was sentenced to 25 years in prison and will be released in 2039. Less than a month after Nuki's murder, O-Dog and T were involved in another killing, but this time, the victim was an innocent person. The person who was tragically killed was 25-year-old Crystal Jackson. She and 2 others were sitting in a car in the 6800 block of South Loomis Avenue around 6:30 p.m. when someone walked up and opened fire, according to police. One of the car's occupants drove the victims to Holy Cross Hospital, where Crystal, who had been shot in the torso, was pronounced dead about 50 minutes later. A 27-year-old man, the intended target, had been shot multiple times in the head and shoulder and was later transferred to Mount Sinai Hospital in critical condition but survived. A 21-year-old woman who was shot in the leg was reported to be in good condition at Holy Cross. Muthana, a clerk at a nearby store, witnessed the killer wearing a dark hoodie and camouflage pants walk up to the car parked outside the Loomis Food Mart. Moments later, he and his co-workers heard 8 to 10 gunshots, which they believed may have come from 2 different firearms. After the shots were fired, the shooter ran around a gate that separates the parking lot from a nearby home, and the car sped away. Crystal was only 25 years old. Now we move on to November 2015, when Goonie Boss Gang strengthened its ties with CMB, short for Cash Money Boys. Although the two gangs had already been close and had previously gone on hits together, their bond grew deeper after the murder of Boss Jock from CMB later that month, an act allegedly carried out by EA. Goonie Boss Gang not only attended Boss Jock's funeral, but during the gathering, both Goonie Gang and CMB formally declared that each other's enemies and problems were now shared. Many of these problems were already shared, but at the funeral, it was finalized. This alliance became unmistakably clear just a month later, when Goonie Boss Gang and CMB teamed up for a hit and managed to take down a high-profile target. One of the rivals that both Goonie Gang and CMB shared was SMB Push Squad. On the morning of December 13, 2015, CMB and Goonie Boss Gang would show what they was capable of together. O-Dog and Marco were out riding, actively looking for enemies. While driving down May Street, they spotted Smiley from SMB Push Squad outside. They circled the block and Marco pointed him out, saying Smiley was an op. O-Dog agreed and said they'd swing back around. When they pulled up, O-Dog and Smiley exchanged words. Smiley asked, "What's up, what you want?" To which O-Dog replied, "Just chilling, just hitting blocks." Smiley then said, "Get out and smoke with me." Instead, O-Dog grabbed his gun, stepped out of the car, and opened fire. Later, when talking about it, O-Dog bragged, "I was so close, I was seeing like little pics in his head, polka dots in his head." After the shooting, O-Dog jumped back into the car and they drove toward Aberdeen, where he lived, but Marco ran 2 stop signs, attracting police attention. O-Dog bailed out, ran to his baby mother, Tuka's sister, changed clothes, and had her urinate on his hands to wash away the gunpowder residue. However, while O-Dog was taking precautions, police pulled over Marco. He attempted to flee but was quickly caught and arrested. Shortly after, O-Dog was also taken into custody, and both were charged with the murder. Despite the police arresting them both only minutes after the murder, they somehow managed to beat the case. Now we move to January 2016 when O-Dog would catch yet another body, his sixth I believe. The victim, known as D-Money, was affiliated with D-Town and Hit Squad 049. He was killed on May Street, enemy territory but within walking distance of Goonie Gang's area, by O-Dog and Tay Boog, both members of Goonie Gang. During testimony, Lil A identified O-Dog on surveillance footage, stating he recognized his shooting style from having shot alongside him before. He also named Tay Boog, also known as Rara, as the second shooter. Tay Boog was later fatally shot by an off-duty officer during a robbery. After the shooting, both Rara and O-Dog returned to Elizabeth, proudly boasting about what they had just carried out. After some time, Lil A, O-Dog, Tay Boog, Tuka, and a few other younger Goonie members headed to one of their usual hangout spots, a place where they often smoked, talked, and kept their guns. O-Dog kept bragging about the shooting, while Tay Boog, just 16 at the time, stood in the background looking pleased. The murder brought heavy pressure on Goonie Gang from the BDs, especially since some members, like Boozy and Boogie, actually knew the victim. This was a murder that, by all accounts, should never have happened, and Goonie Gang knew it. In the aftermath, they made deliberate efforts to deflect attention and cover their tracks. Shockingly, they even showed up at the candlelight vigil held for the victim, D-Money, a bold move considering his grieving family was present. Among those who attended were Lil A, O-Dog, Boosie, E-Boogie, and a number of younger members from the gang. Lil A later testified about their presence, stating it was all part of an effort to shift suspicion away from themselves, despite widespread belief on the streets that they were behind the killing. When asked why they attended, Lil A explained, "Because basically, we didn't want all that heat. We were blaming the person who had brought him over there." Roughly 20 Goonie members stood at that vigil, some of them armed, in case tensions escalated. While several family members of D-Money gave them piercing looks, no confrontation occurred. After staying for just over 10 minutes, the group quietly left and returned to their block. DVD-MG was created in D-Money's honor. The summer of 2016 was one of the most violent periods on record, with Goonie Gang at the center of an unrelenting wave of gunfire. At times, there were as many as 3 shootings in a single day linked to the crew. It was chaos, body after body dropped, and the streets felt like the Wild West. On March 15, 2016, Goonie Boss Gang faced their first major loss when Cushy from ETG Goonie Gang was allegedly shot and killed by Tez from Push Squad. Just a month later, on April 25th, Goonie Gang suffered another blow with the death of VA, who was reportedly killed by Mayblock. While VA was mainly affiliated with YMM, he also claimed Goonie Boss Gang as his own, and in his honor, VA Gang was formed, which members of Goonie Gang and YMM claim. A month later, on May 21st, Goonie Boss Gang was allegedly involved in yet another murder, but this time, it wasn't the usual suspects. According to reports, it was Lil D, also known as Steph Curry, along with 2 other Goonie Gang members who carried it out. They had been at a trap house with their leader, O-Dog, who had fallen asleep. While he was sleeping, they reportedly took his gun. When he woke up, another member told him they had gone out to do a drill. Their intended target was Lil Steve from CMB. Tensions had been rising between Goonie Boss and CMB after Marco and O-Dog killed Smiley, and Marco was arrested for the murder. O-Dog began to suspect Marco was trying to shift the blame onto him, fueling a deadly rift between the 2 groups. The feud was also driven by accusations that CMB had cooperated with police in the 4-Nick case. On that day, however, they didn't find Lil Steve. Instead, a man named Duke, also known as Cash a Tick, from Young World DMG approached Lil D and the others to ask if they knew where Lil Steve was. Believing that Duke was affiliated with Lil Steve, Lil D shot and killed him on the spot. Afterward, they returned to the trap house and told O-Dog what had happened. Following the incident, Lil D earned the nickname Steph Curry. O-Dog, the feared and reputed leader of Goonie Gang, later cooperated with Chicago police and identified Lil D as the shooter, stating that Lil D had taken his gun while he was asleep and used it to commit the murder. Since the case was handled by CPD and not federal authorities, his statement carried weight in the investigation. However, despite being charged in 2018, Lil D ultimately beat the case in 2024. Much of the doubt surrounding O-Dog's account came from conflicting witness statements, particularly from Duke's relatives. According to them, Duke had been in the neighborhood simply to deliver a pair of shoes to his daughter. He had been standing on the block visiting with her when a group of males allegedly walked past and flashed gang signs. Prosecutors said Duke sent his daughter away, and shortly after, two individuals emerged from a nearby gangway with their faces covered. One of them fired twice, hitting Duke once in the back. He was taken to Christ Medical Center in Oak Lawn, where he was pronounced dead. Prosecutors concluded that Duke was likely misidentified as a member of the Cash Money Boys, who were in a heated feud with Goonie Gang, despite having no known ties to the conflict. The very next day, another killing occurred. This time, Goonie Gang members were allegedly responsible for the death of Greg Moe from Mayblock. Although this incident was not part of any official investigation and remains unconfirmed, Goonie Gang members openly mocked Greg Moe afterward and publicly claimed responsibility for the hit. 4 days later, Goonie Boss Gang struck again. This time a member of DVDMG known as G-Ball fell victim. He was inside Powell's barbershop in the 1100 block of West 63rd Street, getting his hair done, when two masked gunmen burst in and opened fire. G-Ball, 38, was shot in the arm and transported to Stroger Hospital, where he was later pronounced dead. A friend who was with him at the time was also hit but survived. G-Ball was a father of 5. The one responsible for the murder was Tuka from Goonie Gang, according to the FBI. G-Ball was not the intended target in the barbershop shooting. Goonie Boss Gang allegedly showed up at Powell's barbershop after receiving a tip that Tez from Push Squad, who was believed to be responsible for killing Cushy, was inside. Their goal was retaliation, but instead, G-Ball was caught in the gunfire. The car used in the hit belonged to Lil A's girlfriend. Lil A had picked it up with Boozy before linking up with O-Dog and Tuka. As they headed toward the barbershop, O-Dog turned to Tuka and asked if he was ready, reminding him, "We gotta get him for Cushy." He then told Tuka to pull his hood up tight and make sure his shoes were laced securely. They parked the car in a nearby alley, and Tuka walked to the barbershop, opened the door, and opened fire. After the shooting, he ran back and jumped into the car. As they drove away, O-Dog asked what happened, and Tuka responded, "I got him, I got him." The mood in the car turned celebratory, laughing and excited, until O-Dog received a phone call from a man named Dave. Moments later, O-Dog's tone shifted, and he turned to Tuka and said, visibly frustrated, "Tuka, you didn't get him. You hit someone else." O-Dog was furious with Tuka, telling him he should have handled the hit himself, and that if he had, Tez wouldn't have gotten away. A month later, on June 20th, JoJo from Goonie Gang and a man named Lamar Isaac allegedly killed a 34-year-old man named Ramal Hicks, affectionately known as Pooh, because of his love for the cartoon character Winnie the Pooh. Just the day before, Pooh had attended his family's annual Father's Day picnic. After the event, he was handing out leftover food to homeless individuals near 69th and Ashland when, around midnight, he was confronted by two men. According to a relative, they tried to double-team him. He stood his ground. The men reportedly left, only to return with two more individuals and a young woman, whom the family believes was holding the gun. "We believe it was premeditated," the relative said. The group involved had been causing issues in the neighborhood for about a year, likely referring to the Goonie Boss gang. Pooh was not affiliated with any gangs. He was considered an innocent victim. "10 days later, O-Dog killed a man known as Goldie from Streeton, someone believed to have been involved in the illegal gun trade in Chicago and who had apparently gotten into a dispute with O-Dog. At this point, the violence was spiraling out of control. Killings were happening back to back, innocent people were getting caught in the crossfire, and members of Goonie Gang were openly bragging about the murders on Facebook. It was around this time that the FBI began to focus closely on Goonie Boss Gang, quietly building a RICO case in hopes of taking the group off the streets for good. The day after O-Dog took the life of Goldie, Goonie Boss Gang suffered a loss of their own when G. Winnie, a member of the Vaughn family, was killed. Winnie was sitting in a car with a woman shortly before midnight when a red pickup truck pulled up and someone inside opened fire. The woman was struck in the face and hip, while Winnie was shot in the head. Despite her injuries, the woman managed to drive them both to St. Bernard Hospital and Healthcare Center, where Winnie was pronounced dead. She was later transferred to Stroger Hospital in serious condition, but ultimately survived. Winnie had reportedly been with JoJo from Goonie Gang when the two allegedly robbed a man named Tim, taking his gun and drugs. Not long after, Tim is believed to have retaliated by killing Winnie. Lil A was in jail when he learned about the death of his brothers, news delivered by his parents during a visit. The loss devastated him. It was a breaking point, and the moment he chose to cooperate with the FBI, who had already reached out to him earlier. Losing a second brother was more than he could bear, and it led both Lil A and G-Boy to start seriously reflecting on their lives and whether this path was worth the cost for themselves and their children. That's what ultimately led them to cooperate and try to change their course. However, his friend JoJo from Goonie Gang wasn't interested in change. He was out for revenge. That same day, he shot and killed Loso from Hoodville Crashtown, essentially targeting the first rival he came across. Things began to unravel quickly for the Goonie Boss Gang. Between late 2016 and mid-2017, they suffered the loss of three key members, Boosie Wee, Tay Boog, and Trey Goonie. Boosie Wee was gunned down by Breed and Dread from 071 Ada Block 1300 Anaboys in what was believed to be retaliation for Nuki's murder 2 years prior. Tay Boog was fatally shot by off-duty officers during an attempted robbery, and Trey Goonie was killed by rivals in late May 2017. These losses were major blows to the gang's structure and morale, and just a year later, a dozen members, along with gun suppliers, were swept up in a federal RICO case. Only a few members have received their sentences so far. O-Dog, T, and JoJo are all facing life in prison, but are still awaiting formal sentencing. Tuka and Lala were each sentenced to 25 years for murder, while Javian, a Goonie gang member who was charged with witness intimidation, received a 6-year prison term. This entire story is both chaotic and deeply compelling, and it's likely that some details were missed or left out along the way. One such detail is that T from Goonie Gang once shot Fat Cat from J-Town, who, ironically, is the brother of Lil A's soon-to-be wife. This relationship dynamic puzzled the prosecution, as it seemed unfathomable that such close family ties wouldn't prevent violence. But according to Lil A, neither of them let the engagement get in the way. Both were out for each other, and that's simply how things were. Fortunately, Fat Cat, a key shooter for J-Town, survived the shooting. That's all for now. Thanks for watching. I truly found this story fascinating to put together. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. God bless you all. Hosanna in Excelsis.